My family once played what they considered a harmless prank, leaving me behind at a rest stop as a joke, assuming I would catch up later. I never returned. 15 years passed before they managed to track me down. They had tried to reach me 100 times. The summer I turned 23 was meant to be just like the others. I spent my days working at my dad's hardware store for lousy pay, living at home because college was not a realistic option according to banks, my father, and the way things always seemed to be. I was the constant target of my golden boy brother Ethan's mockery. We were not exactly broke, but vacations to Disney were definitely not something our family could afford. So when Grant, my dad, announced that we were going on a family road trip to my uncle's wedding in Colorado, I should have known something was off. By the third day of that miserable journey, I was already kicking myself for not inventing some excuse to stay behind. My dad and Ethan spent most of the trip finding ways to get under my skin, treating it like some sort of game. Mom, Margaret, would occasionally mumble, "That's enough," but her voice was always so faint, like it was meant more for herself than anyone else. To really understand, you need to know about my family. Grant was not just some regular jerk of a dad. He was the kind of father who might wake me up in the middle of the night over chores I forgot, or throw my things away if they were left where he didn't want them. Since I could understand words, he constantly reminded me that I didn't meet his expectations. Ethan caught on quickly. You could either follow Dad's example or become his target for criticism. Guess which one he chose? That morning, we pulled into some desolate rest area in Colorado. There was nothing around for miles, just fields, mountains way off in the distance, and a sad little building with bathrooms and a few vending machines. I had been dozing off in the back of our Ford Expedition and needed to stretch my legs and hit the bathroom. Dad and Ethan were laughing about something while Mom was messing with her makeup in the visor mirror. I can remember exactly what I was wearing: a faded Metallica t-shirt, jeans with a torn knee, and those battered Vans I had practically worn to death. I did not bring my phone since it was charging in the car. I did not take my wallet either because why would I? We were out in the middle of nowhere, and I was just stepping away for a quick break. Maybe 10 minutes went by, maybe even less. When I walked out of that dingy bathroom, squinting against the Colorado sunlight, the parking spot where we had been was empty. The dark blue Ford Expedition was gone. At first, I figured they had just moved it to mess with me, some kind of dumb joke. I wandered around the entire rest area. Nothing. Betrayal from your own family stings in a way nothing else ever will. I sat on the curb for an hour, telling myself they were just trying to freak me out and would be back any minute. People came and went. Some gave me odd looks. One trucker even asked if I was all right. I lied and said I was waiting for my girlfriend who was still in the bathroom. He nodded and went on his way. By the end of the second hour, a cold, sinking feeling settled in my stomach. They were not coming back. My first thought was to borrow someone's phone, call them, beg them to return, and get me. But as I started to approach a mother with 2 kids, something held me back. A flood of memories surged through my mind. Every moment of humiliation, every time they laughed at me, every joke that had been nothing but cruelty wrapped in a punchline. I could practically hear their voices. Ethan, mocking. "Dude, I bet he's crying right now." My father, dismissive. "He'll figure it out if he's not as stupid as he looks." And my mom, her weak, half-hearted attempts to protest that never made a bit of difference. I made a choice that day. I walked up to that woman and asked if I could borrow her phone, but I did not call my family. Instead, I called information to get the number for the nearest shelter in Grand Junction, which was about 40 miles away. Then I asked her if she might be willing to give me a ride into town. I told her my family had some sort of emergency and had to leave but would be sending someone to pick me up later. She seemed uncertain, but I must have looked harmless enough because she eventually agreed. Spending that first night at the shelter hit me hard. I had nothing but the clothes I was wearing. No identification. No money. No one to contact. Paul, one of the shelter staff, let me use their computer to try to find my uncle's address from the wedding invitation I had seen. My first thought was to make my way to the wedding and track down my family there. But as I sat there, staring at the screen, another thought took over. Why bother? Why chase after people who had literally left me stranded on the side of the road for their own amusement? Instead, I created a new email account. I started looking up resources for replacing a lost ID. I searched for jobs that paid cash. I started piecing together a plan. Within 2 days, I was scrubbing dishes at a little diner called Wendy's. The owner, Gloria, was this woman in her 60s with gray hair streaked with purple and more tattoos than you would expect on someone her age. I had just wandered in and asked if they were hiring. I told her my wallet had been stolen, but that I was desperate for work. She gave me a once-over and said, "Dishwasher quit yesterday. If you steal from me, you're dead. Start now." Rock bottom has a way of simplifying things. There is nowhere to go but up. For the next week, I pulled double shifts, slept at the shelter, and wore whatever donated clothes were available. Paul helped me get the ball rolling on replacing my ID by reaching out to vital records in my home state. With my first paycheck, I bought a cheap pay-as-you-go phone from Best Buy. 6 days after my family abandoned me, the phone rang. Unknown number. I picked it up. It was my mother. Her voice was shaking. "Where are you? Are you all right? We have been looking everywhere." It was all lies. They claimed it was just a joke. That was another lie. They said they had only waited down the road for 20 minutes and then came back to find me gone. I did not believe a word of it. I listened as she rambled on, her concern sounding about as real as plastic. In the background, I could hear my dad muttering something about how I needed to stop being dramatic and get myself to Uncle Sam's. Ethan was laughing. "Dominic, are you there? Say something. We have been worried sick." The cold knot in my stomach had disappeared. All that was left was clarity. "You wanted to see if I could make it on my own," I said. My voice was steady, more confident than it had ever been while talking to them. "So watch me." I ended the call and blocked the number. Then I blocked every other number I could remember that belonged to them. Just to be sure, I went to a T-Mobile store the next day and changed my number altogether. By the time I changed that number, I had missed 25 calls. I could picture them, growing angrier and more frustrated as they realized their favorite target was not coming back to be kicked around anymore. A month later, I was living in a tiny studio apartment above a laundromat. It smelled like fabric softener all the time and was barely big enough to fit a bed and a table. But it was mine. At Wendy's, I had worked my way up to prep cook. Gloria was teaching me how to chop vegetables properly without slicing off my fingers. Occasionally, I would check the old email account my family still had. The messages kept piling up. From Mom, "Please come home. We are so sorry." From Dad, "This childish behavior needs to end now." From Ethan, "Dude, it was just a joke. Stop being such a coward." I never replied. Not once. The thing about freedom is that once you have experienced it, there is no going back to confinement. I'm not going to pretend it was smooth sailing. Some nights, I would scroll through Instagram and see photos of families that genuinely cared about each other. And there was always this deep, hollow ache that no amount of move on could completely silence. There were nights when the loneliness felt endless, like it could swallow me whole. Holidays were the worst of all. But every morning, I woke up in my tiny apartment that constantly smelled like Snuggle, went to my dishwashing job where nobody called me worthless, and kept building my life, one piece at a time. For months after they left me stranded at that Colorado rest stop, I decided to check my email one last time. There was a new message from my mother. "Your grandmother is asking about you. Please just let us know you are alive." I stared at the message, then closed the email, deleted the account, and tossed my old SIM card in the dumpster behind Wendy's. That same night, Gloria showed me how to make her famous apple pie. She said I had good hands for pastry. It was the first genuine compliment I could remember receiving in years. I never looked back. 5 years after being abandoned at that rest area in Colorado, I came across a familiar face while scrolling through Facebook. Not because I was actively stalking my family's profiles. All right, maybe I was. But because Ethan's name had just been tagged in a local news article from back home. He had serious legal troubles due to reckless decisions. Crashed his car into a telephone pole. Nobody was hurt except the pole. The newspaper used his high school football photo. He looked so young, so smug. Nothing like the bloated, disheveled mugshot beneath it. That is the thing about karma. It takes its time, but it never forgets where to find you. By then, I had managed to build something resembling a life for myself in Colorado. The crappy studio above the laundromat eventually got replaced by a one-bedroom apartment with actual windows. I worked my way up from dishwasher to line cook, and eventually to assistant manager at Wendy's. Gloria still ran the place with an iron fist wrapped in a flour-dusted glove. But somewhere along the way, she started treating me less like some charity case and more like, I don't know, maybe a weird nephew or something. When I finally had some savings, the first big thing I bought was a decent laptop. Nothing fancy, but good enough for taking online classes through the community college. Business management, basic accounting, the sort of stuff Grant always claimed was for people who couldn't handle real work. I settled into a routine. Mornings at Wendy's, afternoons studying, evenings back at work. Repeat. I won't pretend I wasn't still damaged by everything that happened. Trust issues? More like a subscription to distrust, ready to be canceled the second someone got too close. In 5 years, I had made exactly 2 friends. Frank, my neighbor, who played bass in a terrible garage band and sometimes handed me homemade beer that tasted like hoppy dishwater. And Gloria, if she counted as a friend rather than just a boss. That all started to change when Leah began coming into Wendy's. Every Tuesday and Thursday, like clockwork. She always ordered the same thing: Denver omelet, no tomatoes, extra coffee. Always sat at the counter with a textbook spread open in front of her. Medical school, I eventually learned. She had this way of zoning out completely while studying, fork halfway to her mouth for minutes at a time. I timed her once, just for the hell of it. 5 minutes and 24 seconds before she realized her eggs had gone cold. For months of refilling her coffee before she actually looked up and noticed me. I mean, really noticed me. Her eyes widened a bit, and she said, "Your name tag is spelled wrong." It was not. But that somehow became our inside joke. From then on, I wore a different wrong name tag every Tuesday and Thursday. She would point it out, and I would act shocked. Dumbest flirting strategy ever. But it worked. Our first date was never even supposed to be a date. Her study group bailed on her last minute. She had a reservation at some pizza place that was impossible to get into, and I happened to be wiping down the counter when she got the cancellation text. Next thing I knew, I was sitting across from her at Enzo's, both of us realizing this looked exactly like a date. 6 months later, she moved into my apartment. A year after that, we upgraded to a slightly bigger place. Nothing fancy. Just a 2-bedroom apartment with a bathroom where the toilet did not constantly run and neighbors who didn't practice bass solos at 2 in the morning. Still, I kept tabs on my family through fake accounts. Not exactly my proudest habit, but there it was. Dad's hardware store started struggling after a Lowe's opened on the edge of town. I would see his desperate, bitter rants on community Facebook pages. Mom's social media became the shrine to the idea of family. Constant throwback pictures of us all smiling. Posts about missing her boys, plural, which was rich. She would tag Ethan but never mention me, like I had just been erased. Ethan drifted from one job to the next. His social media was full of vague posts about haters and new opportunities. The typical online smokescreen of someone whose life was spiraling. 2 years in, Gloria pulled me aside during inventory and told me she was thinking about opening a second Wendy's location on the other side of town. She asked if I would be interested in running it. Not owning, running. Big difference. I barely slept that night. Kept wondering if it was some sort of cruel test or a joke. People like me did not get chances like that. Grant had drilled that into my head for years. Toxic beliefs have a way of lingering, even when you have long since escaped the poison. But I said yes. Because Leah, half asleep beside me, mumbled that I would be an idiot not to. Because Frank, through a haze of weed smoke, shrugged and said, "Duh, you practically run the original place already." Because Gloria was not Grant. She was not my family. And she had never once made me feel like I was worthless. Wendy's East opened 7 months later. It was smaller than the original, with a different menu, my menu. That first year, I was working 90-hour weeks. I dropped 10 pounds that I really could not afford to lose. Leah and I fought constantly about me never being home. More than once, I came back to find passive-aggressive notes stuck to the fridge. But despite all that, it worked. People came. They kept coming back. The food was good. The vibe was welcoming. We were not getting rich, but we were making it. 5 years after being left behind at that Colorado rest stop, I was making enough to help Leah chip away at her med school loans. Not all of them. Those things were monsters. But enough to make a real difference. When I showed her the payment confirmation, she broke down crying. Not the polished, movie-style tears. The real kind. Snotty, red-faced, hiccuping crying. In that moment, I felt more like a real person than I ever had before. And then, I found out my grandmother had died. I learned about it through Facebook. Mom had posted this long, dramatic tribute loaded with heart emojis. Grandma Helen was the only one in the family who ever stood up to Grant. She was the only one who really saw me. She used to slip me $20 bills when no one else was looking. Told me to save it for when I made my escape. I think she meant college. Turned out, it was more literal than either of us realized. I considered going to the funeral. Even went so far as to look up flights. Leah offered to come with me, said she would hold my hand through the whole miserable reunion. Frank said I could take his rusty old hatchback if I preferred driving. Gloria, ever blunt, shrugged and said, "Dead people don't know if you're there or not." so do what gives you peace. I did not go. Instead, I sent flowers. Just a generic sympathy arrangement. Signed the card with my name, Dominic. No return address. No note. Just my name. The reaction on social media was instant. Mom posted about signs and messages from beyond. Ethan made cryptic comments about prodigal sons. Grant stayed silent online, but I could imagine the storm raging behind closed doors. A week later, I received a friend request from a profile I did not recognize. It was just a random name. No posts, no friends. I nearly deleted it until I read the message. Dom, it's Uncle Sam. Your mom gave me your old email, but it bounced back. Are you okay? We've been worried. Your dad has been asking around about you. I blocked the account. That night, I experienced my first panic attack in 5 years. Sitting on the bathroom floor at 3 in the morning, trying not to wake Leah, feeling like my lungs were collapsing. I kept picturing Grant tracking me down, barging into Wendy's, tearing apart everything I had worked so hard to build. Leah found me there an hour later. She did not ask questions. She just sat beside me, her shoulder pressed against mine. When I could finally breathe again, she said something so simple but so true. They cannot take anything from you that you do not give them. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I got advice about restraining orders just in case. I tightened my privacy settings on everything. I asked Gloria to make sure her staff knew not to give out any information about me to anyone. I focused on what I could control. 6 years to the day after my family abandoned me, I married Leah. We had a small ceremony at a state park. Frank was my best man. Gloria made the cake and cried through the entire thing, her mascara streaking down her wrinkled cheeks. Leah's big, loud family welcomed me like I had always been part of them. Her dad cracked jokes that, for once, did not make me flinch. Her mom hugged me, and it did not set off any alarms in my head. That is the thing about found family. Sometimes, it finds you when you have long since stopped searching. A week after the wedding, I was up late, scrolling through my dummy account. That is when I saw it. A post from Grant on a community page. Looking for information on my son Dominic. Last known location Grand Junction, Colorado. Family emergency. There was no emergency. I knew that much. What I did not understand was why, after 6 years of silence, they were suddenly searching for me. So, I started digging. Made another fake account. Joined community groups from my hometown. Pieced things together, bit by bit. The hardware store had gone under. Their house was being foreclosed. Mom had some kind of health issues she was vague posting about. Ethan had moved back home after his third DUI. They were not looking for me because they missed me. They were searching for me because they needed something. And you know what? For the first time in 6 years, I smiled when I thought about them. Not because their lives were falling apart, but because I realized something that truly mattered. I did not care anymore. I closed the laptop, crawled into bed next to Leah, and made a decision. I would keep an eye on them from a distance. Not out of hatred, not out of love, but because sometimes the most satisfying revenge is not about what you do to them. It is about what you build while they are busy tearing themselves apart. And I was building. Quietly, steadily, with the kind of focus that comes from pain transformed into purpose. But even the most carefully built life can be shaken. One day, I received a notification on LinkedIn. 15 years after being abandoned at that Colorado rest stop, the life I had built so carefully glitched. Someone had viewed my profile 27 times in a single day. Not exactly strange for LinkedIn. Recruiters do odd things like that all the time. But the name was what caught my attention. Ethan Carter. My brother. That is the thing about the past. It is patient. It will sit quietly in the tall grass for years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. By then, my life looked nothing like it did during that first year in Grand Junction. Leah had finished med school, completed her residency, and now worked part-time at a local clinic so she could spend more time with our kids. We had 2 of them, Lily, who was 7, and Ryan, who was 4. The apartment had been replaced by a modest 4-bedroom house on the edge of town. Nothing extravagant, but it had a yard where the kids could play and where I could try, unsuccessfully, to grow tomatoes. Wendy's had expanded to 3 locations. It was still far from being some giant franchise, but it was enough that I no longer had to work the line unless someone called in sick. Gloria had semi-retired a couple of years earlier, though she still dropped by unannounced to criticize the way we made her pie crust. I had made my peace with the past. At least, I thought I had. I still kept tabs on my family every now and then, but what used to be a daily obsession had become an occasional, passing curiosity. The last I had known, Grant and Margaret had downsized to a smaller place after losing the house. Ethan had bounced through a marriage, a divorce, and then another marriage. They all seemed to have moved on, just as I had. But the LinkedIn notification shook me. 15 years of silence, and now this? I mentioned it to Leah while we were going through our usual Sunday night routine, folding laundry and half-watching some Netflix show we had fallen behind on. She paused, holding a mismatched sock in each hand, and asked if I was all right. I nodded, because how could I explain it? That a simple LinkedIn notification had me feeling like I was 22 again, stranded at a rest stop with my father's voice echoing in my head, calling me worthless? 3 days later, I was at Wendy's East, the original second location, helping with inventory because our supplier had sent the wrong coffee filters again. Maya from the front called back to say there was some family asking for me. My first thought was Leah's parents, who occasionally surprised us when they were passing through town. I walked out front, already planning how to convince them to stay for dinner. But it was not Leah's family. Grant looked older, smaller. His once imposing frame had shrunk, and his hair was a dull, graying mess. Margaret's face was drawn and pinched, with hair dyed a shade of brown that only made her look more tired. Ethan stood there, too. He looked like Grant had at 40, same posture, same habit of taking up more space than necessary. He had brought someone along, a young woman I did not recognize. She could not have been much older than her early 20s. She hovered behind Ethan like she was not sure if she belonged there. Nobody spoke. The noise of the lunch rush seemed to muffle itself until all I could hear was my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Grant spoke first, saying my name like it was a question. I nodded, because for some reason, my voice refused to cooperate. I had played out this moment in my mind 1,000 different ways over the last 15 years. Sometimes, I imagined myself tearing into them with righteous fury. Other times, I was distant and indifferent, completely unaffected by their existence. And on a few embarrassing, late-night occasions, I pictured some kind of tearful reconciliation. But reality is always messier than the scenarios you build in your head. I gestured toward an empty table in the corner and asked Maya to bring some waters. Then I sat down across from the people who had once been my family and waited. They found me because of an article titled Climbing to Success, 10 Inspiring Local Success Stories. It was not even a big piece, just a small sidebar with a photo of me standing in front of Wendy's original location. One of Mom's old high school friends had moved to Colorado, seen the article, and sent it to her with a casual, "Isn't this your son?" 100 missed calls. That was the number they said they had made to my old phone over the years before it was disconnected. Mom threw that number out like it was supposed to mean something. They all talked at once. Mom tried to explain how worried they had been. Grant insisted I had misunderstood what happened that day. Ethan acted like we were just old pals catching up. The young woman, who turned out to be Ethan's second wife, Faye, simply watched me with curious eyes. I let them talk. I watched them twist the story to fit their own narrative, where they were not the bad guys. I noticed the way Grant kept glancing around the restaurant, sizing it up like he was trying to put a price tag on everything. I saw how Mom's hands trembled slightly when she reached for her glass. I caught Ethan's charm slipping every time he thought I was not looking. Eventually, when they had nothing left to say, I asked the only question that mattered. Why now? That was when the truth began to come out, piece by uncomfortable piece. Grant had medical bills piling up, heart problems with no insurance to cover them. The second house was slipping into foreclosure just like the first. Ethan's latest business venture, something vague and overhyped involving cryptocurrency, had crashed and burned. Mom needed knee surgery she could not afford. They were not there for forgiveness. They were there for money. I should have felt anger. Should have thrown them out without a second thought. Instead, something else settled over me. Pity. They looked so small. So desperate. The giants who had once ruled over my entire world were now just flawed, broken people. I told them to come to my house for dinner that night. Said I needed some time to think, to discuss things with Leah. They agreed eagerly. Grant already looked like he was counting his blessings. That whole afternoon felt surreal. I picked Lily up from her dance class and helped Ryan with his preschool show and tell project, all while texting Leah updates about who was coming to dinner. She offered to take the kids to her sister's house. I told her no. I wanted them there. I wanted my family to meet my real family. Dinner was chicken enchiladas. Not some fancy dish, just a recipe from the back of an Carniceria Sonora box that I had tweaked over the years. Lily set the table without being asked, carefully placing forks on the wrong side until Leah quietly corrected her. Ryan insisted on wearing his Spider-Man costume because it was Tuesday, and apparently Tuesday was now officially Spider-Man Day. When the doorbell rang, my hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the dish I was carrying. Leah squeezed my arm as she passed, whispering that she had my back no matter what. The kids looked up, sensing that something big was happening. The thing about moments you dread for years is that when they finally arrive, they are both worse and better than you imagined. Introductions were painfully awkward. Grant kept calling Leah Karen, even after being corrected several times. Margaret could not stop crying every time she looked at the kids, which only succeeded in freaking Ryan out. Ethan and Faye were the most tolerable, at least trying to hold a conversation. But Ethan could not resist dropping hints about how family was supposed to help each other out. After dinner, Leah took the kids upstairs for their baths and bedtime. She gave me a look that said, clear as day, text me if you need rescuing. And then it was just me and them, sitting in a living room that suddenly felt far too small. Grant led with his pitch. Talked about how family sticks together. How he always knew I would make something of myself a lie. How they just needed a little help to get back on their feet. $20,000. Just a loan, he said. Of course. I let him finish. Then I asked if he remembered what he said to me on my 18th birthday. He stared at me, blank and confused. I reminded him, at least you cannot disappoint me anymore once you are not legally my problem. I turned to Mom next and asked if she remembered what she did when Grant tore up my acceptance letter to community college and tossed it in the trash. Nothing. She had done absolutely nothing. Then I looked at Ethan and asked if he remembered telling my first girlfriend I was probably just a coward when she came by the house looking for me. His smile faltered. They all squirmed, stumbling over excuses. Grant's voice started to sharpen, the same edge that once made me shrink into myself. But the truth is, I was not that person anymore. I was 15 years and a lifetime away from that broken kid. I got up, walked to my office, and came back with an envelope. I handed it to Grant. Inside was a check for $76.50. He glanced at it, then looked at me, bewildered. What the hell is this supposed to be? That, I told him, was exactly the cost of a Mustang ticket from Grand Junction to our hometown back in 2010. It is the exact amount it would have taken for me to make it back home from where you left me. The silence that followed felt like a vacuum. Then Grant started shouting. Called me ungrateful, selfish. Said I had always been a disappointment. It was the same greatest hits album of my childhood, replayed one last time. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I just stood up and told them it was time to leave. Mom tried a different tactic. Tears. Guilt. How could you do this to your own family? Ethan's polite facade crumbled, his expression turning cold and bitter. Faye just looked embarrassed for all of them. When they finally left, Grant crumpled the check and threw it on the front step before storming off. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, my legs suddenly weak. Leah came downstairs and asked if I was all right. I nodded, not trusting my voice. We cleaned up the dinner dishes in silence. Checked on the kids, who were sound asleep. Went through the motions of bedtime like it was any other night. While setting the security system, I pulled up the front door camera feed on my phone. They were still in the driveway, arguing. Grant gesturing wildly, Mom crying, Ethan staring at our house with a look I knew too well. The twisted combination of envy and resentment. Eventually, they got into their rental car and drove away. I have not seen or heard from them since, and I do not expect to. That chapter is closed. The thing about revenge is that the best kind is not something you do. It is something you live. Every single happy moment with my kids. Every shared joke with Leah. Every quiet Sunday morning without fear. Every ordinary day in a life I built on my own terms. I never made it back home. I built something better. I built one. Did you enjoy this story? Leave a comment below. Subscribe to the channel if you want more stories like this.